Hey, what's going on everybody? Welcome back to another one of my videos. My name is Zach Pasquarello. I own a trucking company and every single week I share the numbers with my trucking company. So I'm an accountant, I'm a bookkeeper, so I know the numbers and I've had my trucking company for 2 years now. I've had a lot of bad things happen. I've had a couple good things happen. My biggest thing is I try to be honest and transparent with you. So let's just jump right into it. I'm going to put some numbers up on the screen. I'm going to talk about some numbers. For my company specifically, I have one tractor trailer. So I've got a CDL driver, a 2016 International Pro Star, and a 53-foot dry van trailer. And I'm going to be talking about my numbers for last week. So that was November 13th through November 19th. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to run through the loads that I ran. So I own the company. I don't drive the truck. I have a dispatcher who dispatches my truck for me. So I'm pretty hands-off. I do all of the administrative work, but I don't do any of the dispatching, I don't do any of the driving. So we ran 4 loads last week. The first load was on Monday. It picked up in Atlanta, Georgia, and it delivered to Tennessee. The broker was Echo Global Logistics. 112 miles of deadhead, 369 miles loaded, so total we had 481 miles and it paid $900. So the total rate per mile was $2.06, which I know is terrible, but coming out of the Southeast, going to kind of the Midwest slash the Southeast. Tennessee is a lot better than the Southeast, but I know it's kind of technically still in the Southeast, but the rates coming out of Tennessee are much better. So we took a really bad rate leaving Georgia, but we wanted to get to Tennessee closer to the Midwest. So $2.06 all in all, total rate per mile. The second load we got from JB Hunt, it was going from Memphis, Tennessee over to Maryland, and that was a lot better. That was paying $2.56 per mile. So total miles 900 with only 6 miles of deadhead. So that's the good thing about going to an area like Tennessee or Illinois or Michigan. There's just a lot of loads coming out of those states and those cities. So you don't really have to deadhead as far as you would if you were in Texas or Florida or Georgia or Massachusetts. So the deadhead is a lot lower and the rates are generally a lot better coming out of those Midwest states. So we went over to Maryland, and then from Maryland we went back down to North Carolina for a total of 433 miles, and the rate per mile on that was still it was okay, $2.30 a mile, but we knew that coming out of Maryland. So that's kind of why we took a good rate going into Maryland. We knew we would take kind of a lower rate coming out of Maryland, and then the flip side, hopefully from North Carolina back up to Pennsylvania, we take a good paying rate. So $2.30 a mile going from Maryland down to North Carolina, and then finally, to end the week on Friday last week, we ran from North Carolina up to Virginia, and technically my driver had to go back to Pennsylvania because that's where we're stationed. So from North Carolina up to Virginia, the load was it was 18 miles of deadhead, and it was like 150 miles loaded, and it was paying $970. But what I did, obviously I have to pay for my driver to drive from Virginia back to Pennsylvania, so I factored those miles into like the loaded miles kind of, just so I could know my true rate per mile, because I'm going from pickup to delivery to final destination where my driver is. And I always count all of my deadhead miles, because no matter what, I'm paying my driver, I'm paying for diesel on my truck, and I'm running the risk of breakdowns, and I'm paying for repairs and maintenance. So deadhead miles, loaded miles, I treat them all the same because the cost for my business is exactly the same. So I've heard some owner-operators don't really care about deadhead, which just absolutely blows my mind because it's still just as important as loaded miles. So what I did for this final load, like I said, I took the deadhead plus the loaded miles plus the trip from the drop-off back to his house. All in all, it was 363 total miles. So that's what I'm using to calculate my rate per mile. And my dispatcher knows this. That's why he booked this load. It was a super short load, but it was paying a lot. Whenever we factor in the additional miles, we're still ending with $2.67 per mile. So for the week total, 2,177 total miles, $5,255, and a total rate per mile of $2.41. I'm not thrilled about that rate per mile, but if you watched my last 2 videos, that rate per mile is definitely better than what I've been getting in the past. I really want to be closer to $2.60 a mile, but $2.41 a mile is okay. It would have been a lot closer to $2.50 or $2.60 if we weren't starting the week out in Georgia. If you remember, we took that load from Georgia to Tennessee. It was only paying $2 a mile. So that really hurt our rate per mile. hopefully next week we can stay out of the Southeast, we can stay out of the Northeast, and we can average $2.60 per mile. With that being said, it looks like the national average is right around $2.30 per mile right now. So I'm still happy with $2.41 per mile, especially because I'm counting deadhead. So that national average is just loaded miles rate per mile. So even with deadhead, I'm still 10 or 15 cents above the national average. So I'm okay with that. So that's how much money we made. Now I'm going to try to throw some more numbers up on the screen. Let's look at the money that I spent. So I pay my driver 62 cents per mile. So 2,177 miles times 62 cents per mile. That gets you $1,322 for last week, which is pretty good. I know a lot of CDL drivers, they want to be as close to $1,500 per week, and my driver is getting close to that. Hit us kind of hard this week. We spent $2,201 on fuel, and I think my cost per gallon was pretty close to $5 a gallon. So it was closer to $4.50 a couple months ago, but diesel prices are creeping back up, and now we're paying close to $5 per gallon. So spent a little over $2,000 on diesel, and my truck payment, my truck insurance, that stays the same every single week. I just take, I'll try to do this real quick for you. Try to follow along. I take the total purchase price of the truck, divide it by 36, and divide that by 4.3. So that is my weekly cost of my truck. Total purchase price divided by 36 months, because that's how long I plan on using the truck. 36 months, so now I have my monthly cost, and then on average there are 4.3 weeks in every single month. So take the monthly cost of your truck, divide it by 4.3, and that's your weekly cost of your truck. I do the same thing for insurance. I take my monthly insurance payment divided by 4.3, and that's my average weekly insurance payment. So my truck costs $1,800 per month, my insurance is $1,700 per month, and my trailer is $558 per month. So divide that by 4.3 and you get your weekly cost. I pay 3% for factoring, I pay 6% for dispatching. So my dispatching fees were $315 last week. My factoring fees were $142 last week. My registration, I also calculate my registration on like a weekly basis. So I take my annual registration, which cost me $1,600 last year, and my heavy vehicle use tax, which was $550. I combine those two numbers and I divide them by 52. That way I can spread out my weekly registration fees, and that comes out to like $40 or $41 per week. It's not a lot, but like I always say, I try to account for everything. So those are all like the usual expenses: fuel, the cost of my truck, insurance, factoring, dispatching, registration, and then there are a couple miscellaneous expenses that happen every so often. So for this week, I paid interest on my truck, which was $160. So not only do you have to account for the cost of your truck, and even if you pay your truck with cash, you still want to spread out the cost of your truck. You don't want to, if you pay $60,000 cash for your truck today, you don't want to just count that $60,000 expense this month. You want to capture that expense over the next 36, 48, or 60 months. So I have a loan for my truck, so I paid $160 in interest last week. That happens once a month. It doesn't, I never know which week it's going to happen on, but it happened last week. $160 for interest. My driver took one shower, which I've gotten a lot of feedback in the comments, and I always appreciate your feedback. So thank you very much for commenting. As of Sunday after Thanksgiving, I'm going to tell my driver that he can no longer use the company credit card to pay for his own showers. So he will now be responsible for showers. So thank you for your feedback. I hope that goes over well. I'm spending like at most $30 a week on showers. Sometimes it's 15, sometimes it's 0. But I agree with you, and that should not be my responsibility to pay for his showers. So my driver, he's very cautious. He weighs the truck every single time he gets loaded, which I was a little frustrated with in the beginning. But if he does get pulled over, if he is overweight, he can get in a lot of trouble. My business can get in a lot of trouble. So I'm okay with him weighing the truck every single time. So I spent $13 on a scale, and then he had to get it reweighed because he had to adjust the axles. So that was an additional $3.50. So for that one particular load that he weighed, $16.50, just for peace of mind that he's not overweight. And then for one night, he had to pay $13 for parking. And then finally, I have an iPad. So I have an iPad. That way he can use it for communicating with my dispatcher, communicating with me, accessing his ELD with Keep Truckin' or Go Motive. He can use the GPS on the iPad, and he can also take pictures of the bill of lading and email them or text them directly to my dispatcher. That way, he doesn't have to technically use his personal phone for anything. And I got a pretty good deal with Verizon. It's all run through my business, so it's like a business data plan, which is kind of cool to have like a bill in your name. If you guys are looking for like building business credit or building credibility for your business, it's always good to have like utility bills or cell phone bills in the name of your business. That way you can show proof that your business is legitimate. So I have a monthly data usage and a monthly bill for Verizon, and I pay $41 for the iPad. I don't think that's very expensive. I mean, for 41 bucks a month, he gets to use an iPad, and that's like the cost of the iPad and the data is all included in that $41 per month. So all in all, my miscellaneous other expenses to include interest, shower, scale, parking, and the iPad was $247 this week. My fuel was a little over $2,000. I paid my driver $1,300. So after all of my expenses, after all of my revenue, I profited a whopping $48, which let me tell you, I was extremely disappointed whenever I ran these numbers. I ran these numbers on Monday and all weekend. This is how nerdy I am. All weekend, I was super excited to run the numbers because I felt like we had a really good week. Like not a lot went wrong. We didn't pay for tolls. We didn't pay for any repairs. My driver got a decent amount of miles, 2,100 miles. I was so excited to run the numbers because I was like, oh, we definitely made 500 bucks this week. Like I definitely felt like we had a really great week, but we didn't. And that's because my rate per mile was only $2.41 per mile. So if we could have been closer to $2.60 per mile, that would have been an additional 20 cents per mile. And 20 cents per mile times 2,000 miles, that right there would have been $400. And I would not have paid my driver any more. I would not have paid for any more fuel. Like we would have driven the same amount of miles. I would have paid a little bit more in dispatch fees. I would have paid a little bit more in factoring fees, but I probably would have ended up profiting closer to $400 last week if we could just get the rate per mile up 20 cents. That's why it's so important that you guys know your numbers and you know exactly what your cost per mile is and your rate per mile is, because now I can talk to my dispatcher and can say, hey, we need to be closer to $2.60 per mile if we're running less than 2,500 miles per week. If we're running more miles, we can take a lower rate per mile. But if we're running less miles, we need a higher rate per mile to cover all of the fixed expenses. I was super disappointed with these numbers, but keep in mind, if you've been following along for the past 2 weeks, I was like negative $1,000 the past 2 weeks. And I talked to my dispatcher and I told him like, hey man, like I'm really upset about this. We gotta do better. He's like, but remember, you were negative the past 2 weeks. So technically this was like a $1,000 improvement week over week. So that was a good perspective to keep in mind. Hopefully this week and next week goes better. This is a short week with Thanksgiving. So hopefully next week after Thanksgiving, we can knock it out of the park. We can get miles, we can get a higher rate per mile, and hopefully this business can be profitable.